Okay, so let's go to here. Good. Okay. I hope you guys had a good weekend, and I am going to lecture through this and probably the end of this chapter so that we can get our quiz going here. This will probably be the last chapter we get through. So, anyway, um, we've gone through a lot of this stuff. Nice thing about having these things recorded, you can go back and watch them again. The respiratory zone, the conducting zone. We've kind of been going through the conducting zone. We talked about palates and uvulas and how they move when we swallow, and sinuses and all this kind of stuff in the pharynx, the naso, the oro, and the laryngeo, and all those type of things. We talked about the cricocartilage and the thyrocartilage. We talked about tracheostomy, how we put that in between those two things in emergency situations for us to be able to breathe. The epiglottis. Anyway, we talked about the trachea, how it has cilia, and smoking causes the cilia to die, and therefore we lose that mucociliary ladder, and therefore we get stuff that gets accumulated, mucus that is getting dust and debris particles and all that kind of stuff, right? With those cilia not able to bring that up, we have to cough it up. So that's a smoker's cough, okay? And with us unable to bring that up, and coughing is a mechanism of allowing that stuff to accumulate, you don't want to give smokers things that inhibit the cough, right? Because then they can't get junk out of their lungs, okay? Good lung, smoker's lung. Don't smoke, okay? Reinforcement. Okay, we talked about the trachea is a bunch of C-shaped rings that are stiff, and you can feel those in your throat as you run your fingers up and down the throat, and that's to provide a airway that is always open. And at the C-shaped portion of it, it's open in the back to allow the esophagus to be able to expand when you swallow that huge piece of pizza that you should have chewed about 50 times more. Okay? The Heimlich is us creating a cough or increasing pressure to drive up out of the trachea to dislodge whatever is stuck in that airway. There's that tracheostomy. And again, that is done below the vocal cords. So if someone is breathing through their tracheostomy, then they're not going to vibrate their cords, and therefore they won't be able to make noise unless they plug the hole while they're talking, and the air will go past and vibrate the vocal cords. Okay? Trachea is divided into the right and left primary bronchi. Okay, we talked about if you're going to swallow something, if something's going to get lodged in something, it's going to be that right one because it's bigger and it's more vertical. So the tendency is for it to fall down into there. It's easier to fall. The left lung is smaller, has 2 lobes. The right lung has 3 lobes. We have the cardiac notch in the left side. The bronchi-pulmonary segment is divided up. The left one has 8 and the right one has 10, and that's important because if you're a lung specialist, you can be very specific with other lung specialists or radiologists, or if you're going to do some radiation treatment or something like that, being specific with which lung segment will help be just more direct and focused and specific, and that's always good. Okay. And so, yeah, respiratory therapists and surgeons use this info for different bronchi-pulmonary segments, right? They use these so they can treat the patient as they need, even to the point of removing the disease segment and leaving the good tissue, right? So the lung weighs 2.5 pounds, blah, blah, blah. Now, we talked about the pleura. Okay, now, we did not talk about that. We're getting new stuff. So pleura, right? We've done this, right? Parietal and visceral. Parietal is lining a cavity, and visceral is on the organ itself. Okay? So, when we talk about parietal pleura, we're talking about the lining of the cavity in which the lungs are sitting. If we're talking about the visceral pleura, we're talking about the lining on the lungs themselves. Well, in that space between the parietal and the visceral, we have some fluid in there, right? It lubricates the layers so they can slide across each other. It causes them to cling tightly to each other through surface tension, okay? So, and we want that so that the lungs stay, um, so that the lungs stay inflated, okay? And we'll learn about this, okay? It helps maintain pressure differences necessary for inhaling and exhaling. We'll learn that, okay? But regardless, those two surfaces kind of stick together. This fluid layer in there allows them to stick together, okay? It allows the visceral, the layer on the lung, to stick to the layer on the cavity wall, okay? All right. So here we are. We have our lungs themselves. We have our visceral pleura. We have our parietal pleura on the outside. And then we have this fluid in between, which really isn't gapped that big. It's probably way closer than that, right? Especially if these are attracted to each other. Anyway. All right. So we've kind of got, once we got into this section here, we've changed and we've gotten away from the conducting portion, right? All this stuff up here, conducting, right? All of these sections here, we're talking about conducting portions, getting the air to the lungs. Now that we're down into the lungs and we're talking about different segments and talking about the coverings of the lung, now we're talking about the area in which the stuff really happens. The respiratory zone, where the oxygen and the carbon dioxide mix or exchange, okay? So this respiratory zone begins as terminal bronchioles, which feed into the respiratory bronchioles, which end in the alveolar chambers. Gas exchange, external rest takes place here, okay? So let's see. So we're getting towards the end of the tree. Here we're at the trachea and the right and primary, but we're talking about the trunk of the tree, the big main branches, and a few more come out there. So as we get into this, when we get towards the leaves of the tree, we're getting into this area here, and that is it's the terminal bronchioles to the respiratory bronchioles, which end in the alveolar chambers. Okay, now the alveoli, they're composed of simple squamous. Right? This is back to chapter 1, 2, 2, 3, whatever. One layer, flat. Right? One layer, flat cells, much thinner than a sheet of paper. Okay? The membrane has gas on one side and blood on the other. Okay? This thing right here, these alveoli, they account for the largest portion of lung volume and provide a tremendous surface area for gas exchange, right? So we have these lungs are highly vascular, all right? So we have all these little blown up almost like bubbles. They're like bubbles, they're like grape clusters that are this simple, thinner than a sheet of paper and gas is on the inside and the blood vessels are wrapped around it. And so this is the largest portion of the lung volume, right? There's just tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of these. Okay? Gas exchange occurs through simple diffusion. All right? So approximate surface area is 50 to 70 square meters. All right? 50 to 70 square meters. That's 40 times greater than your skin surface area. Okay, so all these little alveoli that are blown up in there, those grape clusters and all these vessels and all this stuff that goes on in there, is the amount of surface area from simple squamous gas exchange is 50 to 70 square meters. That's insane in such a small spot. So a moist membrane is required so the type 2 cuboidal cells secrete a substance called surfactant that coats the membrane and interferes with surface tension. Okay, so we have this thing called surfactant. We have cells that are in here, that are in these lungs that secrete surfactant, which brings down the surface tension, which allows for oxygen into the blood and carbon dioxide out. So there we see this must be cuboidal cells that are releasing surfactant to cut down on that and allowing surface tension to be lower, which allows for the diffusion of oxygen and blood, or maybe those are vessels. Anyway, I don't. It kind of would be nice if I had a label on that, wouldn't it? All right. Okay, that's not worry about. Okay, so now we're into quiz 1 already. Okay, so as we go through this, I'm going to go through this fast. Tomorrow we'll do a Zoom to answer questions. I sent you a review sheet to do. Some people have already turned it in. That's great. Awesome. We'll go over those things tomorrow. If you're there on the Zoom and we go over it together, then I'll give you credit for it. If you don't, then you got to send it to me. Okay? Anyway. All right. So we talked about this. We quickly talked about this respiratory zone, right? So as we see, we have these terminal bronchioles, we have the respiratory bronchioles, and then we have the alveoli. So now look at this. If you look at all these little grape-like clusters thing, and look how vascular it is, okay? So there's that respiratory zone, okay? And then with this whole thing we got going on here is we have cuboidal cells, which are releasing surfactant, which helps reduce surface tension so that exchange can be even easier. Okay, and what we're going to learn is some conditions, some conditions that you have that we're going to learn about are the fact that we don't have a good presence of surfactant. So if we don't have surfactant, we don't have, and that surface tension is still there. It makes for that exchange to be difficult, which means it's difficult to oxygenate your blood, which just means it's difficult for you to live. Anyway, okay. So here we are here. We saw this, right? The main function is oxygen, disposing of carbon dioxide. We have those. There's a good picture again of the terminal bronchiole, the terminal bronchiole, the respiratory bronchiole, and then the alveoli. Okay. Conducting portion, the nose, the pharynx, and the trachea. Okay. Okay, let me just see what we got here. Let me. I think I should just keep going here. What do we got? No, I don't want to do that yet. Okay. So we'll do a quick review, and then then tomorrow we're gonna go over that thing. So, the nose. Okay. Remember, we have these concha, which are designed to swirl the air. We do not want it to go just shooting down into the lungs. We want it swirled, we want it warmed, we want it humidified. We want all the garbage that we're breathing in to be stuck to the mucus so that it can be carried away and swallowed so it doesn't get down to the lungs, right? Because again, if we are talking about these structures here, which are paper thin, and there's the site for exchange, we do not want dust and debris to get down in here and get into these, which is going to make it more difficult for that to happen. Things are going to accumulate. It's going to get all scummy and whatever. We don't want that in there. Okay, so we want it to be caught up in here, which can be swallowed or spit out. Okay, the nose does many different things. It warms and humidifies the air. It allows a passage for air. It filters the air. We have our smelling stuff going on up here, right? And then also we have it resonates, right? It allows our voice to sound the way it does. If we don't, then we sound like we're a muppet. Anyway, not only do we have that kind of stuff in here, but we also have it in the trachea and into the terminal bronchi. No, the main right and left bronchus, right? And so that cilia is what's going to help carry garbage out of there up. All right, we'll go over that real quick, right? And the other thing about a cold day, the cilia get slow, which means they get slow and they don't carry things down to the back of your throat like they should, so they start to accumulate in there. And so instead of getting going this way, it runs out that way. Okay? We did that. The nasal cavity, hard palate, soft palate, uvula. Okay. Sinuses lighten the skull, resonate, produce mucus. Okay. We got a lot of mucus going on up here, but we want to get as much of the garbage stuck to it rather than go into your lungs, into those real delicate tissues. Okay? Chronic sinus. Okay, when we talk about the pharynx, right, we talk about the naso, oro, laryngeo. Air only. Air and food and water. Air and food and water. We talked about tonsils. These, if you know the names of them, they'll tell you where they're at. The pharyngeal tonsils, okay, they're located in the nasopharynx. The palatine tonsils are located in the oropharynx. The lingual tonsils are down by the tongue. All tonsils are lymph nodes and work with the immune system, okay? The larynx provides an open airway pattern, which means it's always open, right? Act as a switching mechanism between the respiratory and the digestive systems, right? So between the pharynx and the trachea, we have this larynx, and we also have our vocal cords in here, okay? So we have our pharynx, and then we have our larynx right down in here, okay? The thyroid cartilage is in there. That's what they call your Adam's apple, epiglottis, okay? When air is flowing into this larynx, this thing is upright. It's standing up so that air can go down into the trachea, okay? When we swallow, the larynx is pulled up and the epiglottis tips back and over, and it covers the laryngeal inlet to the trachea, right? So it makes it so the food and the fluid, when we swallow, goes down the esophagus and not down into our lungs. We've all had that when we've had water go down the wrong pipe, right? Quote unquote, we go down the wrong pipe and you cough it up violently, and you cough it, keep coughing and keep coughing until it's all out of there. All right, and that's what this is here, right? Nothing other than air. Once something gets down into there, you are going to cough until it's out of there. All right. And the reflex for coughing does not work when you're knocked out, right? So you don't give somebody some water while they're out, unconscious. All right, and people who are like passed out, having seizures, well, they're usually if they're alcoholic, if they're passed out, and they can die from if they laying on their back on their floor and they vomit and they keep trying to breathe. And anyway, you get it. All right. So, we talked about that mucociliary ladder. We talked about don't smoke. Right? You lose that, and you have to cough. It's the only way of getting that garbage out of there because your cilia are dead because you smoked them. Right? So don't take cough medicine. Well, not cough medicine, but don't take a medication that inhibits your cough, or you're going to fill up with mucus and garbage, right? So good lung, bad lung, don't smoke. These trachea are, we did this already. We did this. Okay, so again, these are delicate tissues, okay? Simple squamous, right? Gas on one side, blood on the other, all right? We talked about how there is a ton of surface area in the lungs. And we have to have this. We need to have that so that it makes that exchange easy. Okay? Okay. I know this was a quick one today, but tomorrow we will review. Wednesday we will have a quiz, and then Thursday we'll keep going. Okay? So if you have any questions, you give me an email and I will get back to you. Do your review sheet. I sent it to you Friday, I think it was. So do that and be ready to do it for tomorrow. We're going to go through it. We're going to answer questions. We'll do it on Zoom, and we'll go from there. All right? You guys have a great day.